Welcome to Heritage at Home. Today I'll be demonstrating how to make light and flaky biscuits. This is a partnership between the Union County Heritage Festival Board of Directors, the Union County Museum, and UT Extension Union County. Biscuits are an important part of any good meal, especially here in Union County. There's such a rich heritage to biscuits. They can be used for dinner, they can be used for breakfast, and it's a great way to use ingredients that you have around your household. Today I'm going to talk about a few tips and tricks to be sure that your biscuits are light and flaky, and walk you through the process of mixing, rolling out, and baking your biscuits. For good biscuits, you want to start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Oftentimes I get questions about the difference between all-purpose flour and whole wheat flour. Flours for baking are made of wheat. All-purpose flour is made with just the endosperm of the wheat kernel, whereas whole wheat flour includes the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. So for more fiber and more nutritional content, you want to choose whole wheat. Most traditional biscuit recipes use all-purpose flour. If you like the taste of traditional recipes, but you want to increase the nutritional content, you can use a combination of 1 cup whole wheat flour and 1 cup all-purpose flour. I'd like to demonstrate how to properly measure flour. When using a measuring cup, you want to be sure to completely fill the measuring cup. You want to use the back of a butter knife to lightly tap across to be sure that your measuring cup is full, and then scrape back across the top. This is going to give you a perfect dry cup measured. When using measuring spoons, rather than scraping the top, you want to use a heaping teaspoon or a heaping tablespoon for dry measurements. For liquid measurements like milk, you want to fill in a liquid measuring cup and get at eye level and be sure that the measurement you need, in this case 2/3 of a cup, you want to be sure that the lowest point matches directly at the 2/3 a cup line. There is a difference between liquid measuring and dry measuring utensils. So for good baking, you want to be sure that you have a liquid measuring cup, that you have dry measuring cups, and dry measuring spoons. For light, fluffy biscuits, we want to be sure that we've sifted our flour. You may have seen flour sifters similar to this, where you add the flour into the top and then turn the crank so that you get a nice dusting. If you don't have one of these available, you can use a sieve strainer. A sieve strainer typically has a sieve netting in the bottom, similar to what you see in this flour sifter. They typically come with a handle where you can pat against the side of your hand to allow the flour to sift down. After sifting your flour, you want to be sure that you sift the flour again with the rest of your dry ingredients. Sifting incorporates air into your batter, which helps to create light and fluffy biscuits. In addition to flour, we're going to add 3 teaspoons of baking powder and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Salt is important in recipes for flavor, and baking powder is an important leavening agent, which allows the batter to rise quickly. After sifting all your dry ingredients together, you want to incorporate shortening. Shortening or other fat sources such as oil help to tenderize your dough, as well as create pockets of air which increase the fluffiness and flakiness of your biscuit. When using biscuits, you want to be sure to use a solid fat such as shortening or butter. In this case, we're going to use 1/3 a cup of shortening. In order to incorporate the shortening into your biscuit batter or dough, you can use a pastry cutter. If you don't have a pastry cutter available, you can use 2 butter knives and cut the shortening while turning in the flour mixture. The goal of cutting in our shortening is to create small globs of fat coated in your flour mixture of dry ingredients. During the baking process, these pockets of fat create steam while the dough is rising and produce a flaky and fluffy biscuit. You want to continue to incorporate the fat into your biscuit mixture until it resembles a cornmeal consistency. It's important when baking, especially if you're new to baking, to read your recipe at least 2 times before starting and gather all your ingredients. Be sure to pay attention to whether you're using baking powder or baking soda. Those are 2 ingredients you certainly don't want to get mixed up. And you also want to pay attention to whether you've got salt or sugar. Mixing those 2 up can change the product quite a bit. After combining the shortening into your dough, you really want to be mindful from this point forward not to overwork the dough. Overworking the dough will create a biscuit that is tougher and doesn't rise quite as well as what we would hope to have. Prepare a workstation. To prepare your workstation for rolling out your dough, the first thing you want to do is dust your workstation lightly with flour. This will help prevent any sticking from occurring when you roll out your dough. It's also helpful to dust your rolling pin with flour. If you don't have a rolling pin available, you can use any cylinder or round object that you can roll, such as a jar or the side of a glass. After preparing your workstation, you're ready to mix in your liquid ingredients and roll out your dough. We'll be adding 2/3 a cup of whole fat milk. Changing the fat content of milk to a 2% or a 1% milk could change the outcome of your recipe. So be sure to follow the ingredients in the recipe exactly. With biscuit dough, it's best to mix the liquid in just until combined, being mindful not to overwork the dough. Once you've mixed in just until combined, you want to knead your dough about 10 to 15 times. Kneading the dough involves folding the dough onto itself, pressing down and turning. At first, there may be many loose flour particles still present, but as you knead your dough 3 or 4 times, you'll begin to get a ball of dough. You can see after kneading about 8 times that our dough has begun to come together. At this point, you want to continue to be mindful not to overwork the dough. I like to take the last bit of dry and put it inside of the dough, fold over, and knead about 2 more times when we get to this point. You can see even from the dough that we have flakiness present. We have sheets of dough upon sheets of dough. This is a good sign. Once we've hit this point, we can move our dough to our rolling area. Being careful not to overwork the dough, you want to roll your dough out to about 1/2 of an inch thickness. From here, you can use a biscuit cutter to cut out your biscuits. When placing your biscuits on your cookie sheet, it's important to think about the final product and what kind of biscuits you prefer. If you prefer a very crispy crust biscuit, you want to place your biscuits at least an inch apart and an inch away from the side of your pan. If you like softer biscuits, you can place the biscuits closer together. This affects the air circulation while the biscuits are baking, and the more space between the biscuits, the crispier crust that you'll get. Once all of your biscuits are rolled out and placed on your cookie sheet, you want to bake them in the oven at 450 degrees for 12 to 15 minutes. Be sure your oven is preheated ahead of time so that you're putting biscuits into a hot oven. Any leftover dough can be re-rolled to press and cut more biscuits. Biscuits are a quick and easy way to get started with baking. When your biscuits come out of the oven, you want to be sure that they're lightly browned on top. If you'd like, you can brush the top of the biscuits with melted butter. I prefer to keep them in a basket covered with a cloth or in a bowl covered with a cloth, just so that they can maintain their heat while you're preparing the rest of your meal. Biscuits go great with apple butter, and they're an important part of our baking heritage here in Union County. 4-H supports students to bake biscuits and learn how to bake other items every year by baking demonstrations at local fairs and festivals, including the Heritage Festival and the Tennessee Valley Fair. We also have a baking contest in the schools every year, so be sure around January or February, when your child brings home that information, you encourage them to bake and bring those items in where they're judged on taste and appearance.